At Rosewood Diner, worlds collided without warning. Andrew Morrison, a billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, sat with his eyes glued to a glowing screen. His fingers scrolled numbers worth millions, yet just feet away, his young daughter wept in silence. Grace Morrison, only 8, shrank into herself while cruel laughter from teenage boys filled the air. Her yellow dress with daisy patterns seemed too bright for such a heavy moment. And while her father drowned in mergers and projections, a weary waitress noticed what wealth ignored. Linda Chen, her apron stained with years of service, saw what mattered most: a child forgotten by the one man who should have been her shield. Booth 7 was no ordinary table that morning. It became the battleground where indifference, cruelty, and compassion collided, setting in motion a story that would tear apart illusions of success. For 37 years, Linda Chen carried trays and poured coffee at Rosewood Diner. Her hands were worn, her back stiff, but her smile was steady. Behind those eyes lived memories of Christopher, her youngest son born with cerebral palsy. She had loved him fiercely until illness carried him away too soon. His absence never left her. Every child she saw carried a shadow of him. Linda didn't work just for wages. She worked to stay connected, to people, to purpose, to the idea that small acts could still change lives. Her uniform was armor, her kindness a weapon. The diner was her stage, where she had seen every type of customer: politicians, construction workers, students, and moguls. To her, they all drank the same bitter coffee. That morning, however, she didn't see titles or wealth. She saw a child who looked too much like Christopher, quietly breaking in plain sight.
Grace Morrison sat in booth 7, her curls damp with tears, her small hands folded tightly as though trying to disappear. At 8 years old, she already knew the weight of the world's cruelty. Teenagers at the next table pointed, mocked her expressions, and whispered insults they thought harmless. Grace had Down syndrome, but her real difference was the gentle softness of her spirit, far too pure for their laughter. She tried to ignore them, staring at her plate of untouched pancakes, moving syrup around as though rearranging sadness. Around her, the diner buzzed with clinking dishes and hurried footsteps, but inside her world, the sound was sharp and unkind. Her father, inches away, tapped impatiently at his phone, business calls pouring from his lips like cold arithmetic. Grace was not invisible to the world. She was invisible only to the one person who should never have looked away. Linda had raised 4 children of her own and buried one. She recognized cruelty long before it finished forming. Without hesitation, she approached the teenagers. Her presence, worn but unyielding, silenced them more effectively than anger. They shifted, muttered excuses, and fell quiet. The diner returned to its hum, but something inside booth 7 had shifted forever. Grace looked up, her tears slowing, her small shoulders loosening for the first time that morning. In a place where her father's fortune offered no shield, a waitress's kindness became her defense. Linda returned to her duties, but her eyes kept drifting back to the little girl in yellow. She knew this moment was larger than a confrontation. She had seen fathers distracted before, but something about this man's absence felt heavier, more dangerous. This was no ordinary family, and no ordinary neglect. Something far greater was unraveling before her.
The diner smelled of bacon grease and coffee grounds, but in booth 7, the air thickened with something unseen. A billionaire missed what mattered. A waitress noticed what money couldn't. The contrast was as sharp as glass. Andrew Morrison, master of boardrooms, sat unaware of the war his daughter had been fighting just feet away. Linda Chen, who lived paycheck to paycheck, had done what fortune failed to do: stand between a child and cruelty. Their worlds should never have crossed, but fate had no respect for class boundaries that morning. What began as laughter from careless teenagers would ripple outward, shaking boardrooms, breaking illusions, and rewriting what success meant. Wealth thought it was untouchable. Poverty knew better. And in that clash, a little girl's tears carried more power than any merger. The story was no longer about pancakes in a diner. It was about an empire's blind spot. Andrew Morrison had spent decades building walls of wealth. Every brick was another acquisition, another merger, another victory in the markets. He believed success meant providing everything Grace could ever need: therapists, private schools, specialists, and opportunities most children only dreamed of. But in chasing provision, he had abandoned presence. This morning was no different. The world tugged at his sleeve. Contracts worth billions, deals poised to collapse if he faltered. His phone vibrated like a second heartbeat, his attention shackled to glowing screens. He didn't see Grace's trembling hands. He didn't hear her stifled sobs. To him, the diner was a pit stop, another minute stolen from efficiency. He thought being a father was measured in bank statements. What he didn't know was that in neglecting the small, quiet moments, he was bankrupt in the only currency that mattered: love his daughter could feel.
While Andrew calculated profits, Grace carried a different ledger. From her backpack, she pulled a worn notebook filled with colored pencil drawings. Pages bloomed with dreams: a picnic beneath trees, baking cookies together, flying kites, reading stories on grassy hills. They weren't memories. They were wishes disguised as art. Every sketch bore her name in careful letters: Grace Morrison, as if claiming her world mattered too. Linda glimpsed the pages and felt her throat tighten. Christopher had drawn like this once: visions of running freely, climbing hills, doing things his body never allowed. Grace's notebook wasn't just art, it was testimony, a gallery of what she longed for but rarely received. Andrew never noticed the notebook. He never asked. He never saw himself drawn in the margins of a daughter's unspoken longing. Love was waiting in crayon and paper. All it needed was a father who would look. Guilt crept through the armor of Andrew's certainty. For the first time, he looked at Grace, not as an obligation, but as a child whose eyes carried sadness too heavy for 8 years. The notebook shook him. Drawings of things they'd never done together forced him to see what money could not buy. He made a decision that shocked even himself. He canceled meetings. He silenced the phone. He told his driver to wait. For that day, business could burn, while he rebuilt what neglect had shattered. Grace's eyes lit up when she realized he wasn't rushing. They walked slowly, shared ice cream, and sat in the park as the afternoon sun softened around them. For one day, Andrew Morrison wasn't a billionaire. He was simply a father. But redemption built in one day can collapse the next. Habits stronger than guilt waited for their return.
For a moment, Andrew believed he had turned a corner, but the empire whispered louder than promises. Emails mounted, meetings piled up, investors demanded. Slowly, his old reflexes returned. The phone reclaimed his gaze, the calendar dictated his hours, and Grace found herself alone again, even when he sat beside her. The drawings continued, but now they showed her sitting in the corner while her father faced away, phone glowing. Her art had become a mirror of disappointment. Linda noticed the return of distance when they came into the diner. Grace's spark dimmed, her shoulders slumped in quiet resignation. Andrew thought his single day of presence was enough, but presence isn't a gift, it's a daily vow. Grace didn't complain. She never did, but her silence spoke louder than tantrums ever could. Andrew had failed again, and this time the failure carved deeper than before. Redemption isn't a one-time decision, it's a battle fought every morning against the weight of old habits. Andrew Morrison had promised to change, but change bent under the pressure of boardrooms and deadlines. Grace was left in the shadows again, her quiet heart bruised by neglect disguised as responsibility. Linda saw it clearly, the same cycle she had seen in countless families, wealthy or poor. Distracted parents all looked the same. One day of attention doesn't heal years of absence, and children, no matter how forgiving, eventually learn to expect less. Grace deserved more. The question was whether Andrew would realize it before the damage became permanent. The cycle was not just about neglect. It was about love fighting against ambition. And for now, ambition was winning. But fate was preparing another confrontation, one that would make excuses impossible and demand change or collapse.
The call came on a Thursday evening. Andrew's ex-wife had heard about the diner incident, the whispers spreading through their circles. She spoke not with venom, but with weary truth. Years ago, during custody battles, she warned him that money wasn't enough, that Grace needed presence, not just provision. He dismissed her then, accusing her of dramatizing, of misunderstanding what success provided. Now her words returned with sharp edges. She reminded him of missed birthdays, hurried visits, and the countless times Grace looked past toys and tutors, waiting for something far simpler: time. Her voice cracked, not from anger, but from the ache of knowing her daughter had carried loneliness in silence. Andrew listened, shame flooding deeper than headlines could wound. This wasn't an enemy's criticism, it was a mother's truth. And it stung because it was undeniable. Neglect wasn't new, it had been his pattern all along. What began in whispers soon roared across headlines. A customer's video from Rosewood Diner surfaced online. Grace crying quietly while Linda slid into the booth to comfort her. Andrew just feet away, absorbed in his phone. The footage spread like wildfire, every frame an indictment. Commentators condemned, investors questioned, strangers judged. The image of a billionaire too busy to see his daughter's tears became a symbol of modern neglect. Memes mocked him, headlines scolded him, shareholders panicked. Andrew could shield companies from hostile takeovers, but he couldn't shield himself from truth caught on camera. The empire felt suddenly fragile, crumbling not from market shifts, but from the revelation of a father's blindness. Grace's sadness had become public record, and while Andrew had always prided himself on reputation, no crafted statement could erase the raw honesty of a child's tears captured on film.
The weight of exposure pressed harder than any financial crisis. Andrew sat alone in his penthouse, screens glowing with criticism, each word heavier than the next. Wealth had always given him armor, but now armor felt like chains. He replayed the video, unable to escape his own face, cold, distracted, absent. Grace's tears cut deeper than any market loss. For the first time in years, Andrew felt powerless. He could command CEOs, sway governments, and buy silence, but he couldn't undo the truth. Shame gnawed at him, relentless, unyielding. He remembered his own childhood, a father who had disappeared into work, leaving him to grow up in shadows. He had promised never to repeat that cycle. Yet, here he was, richer but just as absent. His success had delivered everything except the one thing Grace needed, and that realization hollowed him to the core. One evening, after the rush had faded, Andrew returned to Rosewood Diner. He found Linda wiping down tables, her movements steady, her eyes tired but warm. He expected judgment, but what he received was confession. She told him about Christopher, her youngest son, born fragile yet fierce, taken too soon. She spoke of nights spent praying for more time, mornings spent cherishing small victories, and the ache of knowing neglect had never been part of her story because she couldn't afford to waste a second. Her words cut deeper than criticism. They were not anger, they were truth forged in grief. She told him neglect wounds more than disability, that absence teaches children they are unworthy. Andrew listened, his heart breaking in ways even markets couldn't measure. Linda was not just a waitress. She was a mother who had already faced the loss he was risking every day.
Linda Chen's story was more than sympathy. It was a mirror Andrew couldn't look away from. Her grief over Christopher exposed what his neglect might one day cost him. She wasn't wealthy, wasn't powerful, yet she had given her son everything he needed: presence, dignity, love. Andrew had all the money in the world, yet he had failed to deliver the simplest thing. The mirror didn't show balance sheets or skyscrapers. It showed a father who was dangerously close to losing a daughter's trust forever. Pain has a way of teaching lessons wealth refuses to acknowledge. And for Andrew, Linda's words carried the authority of someone who had already paid the ultimate price. If he didn't change now, he wasn't risking his fortune, he was risking Grace's soul. And no empire could ever recover from that loss. One night, Grace's voice pierced the silence more powerfully than any viral video or public shame. She looked at her father, her eyes wide with the weight of a question she had carried too long. Am I a burden? The words struck harder than lawsuits, harder than market crashes. They landed like a verdict he could not appeal. Andrew felt his chest collapse, his empire shrinking to nothing against the gravity of those 4 words. His daughter, his light, believed she was unwanted, not because of who she was, but because of what he had failed to give. Tears threatened, shame surged, and in that instant, Andrew understood. Grace's disability was not her burden. His neglect was. The question would echo in his mind forever, haunting him with its cruel simplicity. It was the truth money could not silence, and it demanded an answer beyond words.
Grace's question shattered Andrew in ways even scandal could not. He stood in the ruins of his own priorities, realizing every victory in the market had been purchased with pieces of her childhood. The truth was undeniable. He had won battles in boardrooms while losing the war at home. For years, he had convinced himself that wealth secured love, that luxury replaced presence. But the hollow look in Grace's eyes told him otherwise. She didn't need more therapists or tutors. She needed a father who noticed her drawings, who clapped at her plays, who chose her over meetings. Andrew vowed in that moment that he would never again let business outrank blood. The vow wasn't loud or public. It was quiet, trembling, and desperate. But for the first time, it was real. This was no longer about reputation. It was about redemption. Change didn't arrive in declarations. It arrived in crayons and construction paper. Grace began to teach her father what success looked like through her own imagination. Her drawings became lessons, pictures of kites flying, cookies baking, stories read under trees. Each sketch wasn't fantasy anymore. It became a blueprint for their days together. Andrew listened. He painted clumsily beside her, laughed at his own mistakes, and saw the world through colors instead of contracts. Grace showed him that patience wasn't weakness, that slowing down wasn't failure, and that love was measured in time spent, not fortunes earned. She didn't teach him with lectures or shame. She taught him by being herself, a child who deserved more than distraction. In her quiet resilience, she became the professor of love, and Andrew became her most willing student. The empire could wait. His daughter could not.
The true test came not with headlines, but with a school auditorium. Grace was cast in her class play, her small role rehearsed with passion. The date clashed with a board meeting that could decide millions. For a moment, Andrew felt the old pull, contracts waiting, investors watching. But then he remembered Grace's drawings, the question that broke him, the tears he had missed before. This time, he chose differently. He sat in the front row, awkward in a crowd of ordinary parents, his phone silenced, his attention fixed. When Grace appeared on stage, searching the audience, her eyes found him. He clapped louder than anyone, tears streaming freely. For once, she wasn't invisible. She was the star of her father's world. The deal was lost, but what he gained was priceless. Love had finally outranked wealth, and Grace knew it. In boardrooms, choices are calculated, measured in profit and loss. But in families, choices are simpler and heavier. Andrew Morrison had saved corporations from collapse, but could he save his daughter from believing she was unworthy? The school play marked his decision point: love over empire, presence over prestige. But choices are not one-time victories. They must be repeated, proven, and lived daily. The empire would whisper again, tempting him back to distraction. The world would demand his time, his focus, his sacrifice. And Grace would keep watching, waiting to see if her father truly meant it this time. The story wasn't about one evening in an auditorium. It was about whether Andrew could keep choosing love tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that followed. Success in business was temporary. Success in fatherhood required permanence.
Andrew could have hidden, repairing his image behind lawyers and press releases. Instead, he stepped into the storm. At a press conference, cameras flashing, he acknowledged his failure. He admitted that he had neglected what mattered most. But instead of excuses, he offered commitment. He pledged not just to Grace, but to families everywhere raising children with disabilities. He announced new foundations, support programs, and advocacy efforts, using his fortune not as a shield, but as a bridge. The man once humiliated by a viral video now stood as its lesson, unafraid of truth. Investors balked, critics whispered, but Andrew didn't flinch. His empire had been built on silence and distraction. His redemption would be built on honesty and presence. For the first time, his wealth carried purpose greater than numbers. His daughter wasn't his burden. She was his greatest teacher.
At home, evenings changed. The office lights dimmed earlier. Laptops closed. Grace's laughter replaced conference calls. Together, they painted on blank canvases. Andrew's strokes were clumsy, but Grace guided him patiently, her small hands smudged with bright colors. She taught him to mix blues and yellows, to see the joy in messy imperfection. Their bond grew not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency. Grace bloomed with confidence, her drawings evolving from longing fantasies into joyful memories. She painted them baking, picnicking, and reading, moments they actually lived. Andrew framed her artwork, lining his once sterile office walls with reminders of love. Every drawing was a declaration. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was cherished. Their bond didn't erase the past, but it wrote a better future. A future where her smile became his measure of success. And for Andrew, that was enough. Back at Rosewood Diner, Linda poured coffee and watched father and daughter arrive, transformed. Grace's eyes shone with joy, her shoulders lifted, her laughter unburdened. Andrew looked younger, lighter, his gaze fixed on his child instead of his phone. Linda felt a warmth spread through her chest. Protecting Grace had healed her too. Each time she saw their bond strengthen, she felt Christopher's memory honored. It was as if by standing up for one child, she had safeguarded her own son's dignity once more. The diner had witnessed countless families, but few transformations this profound. Linda knew her role had been small, a moment of courage, a voice against cruelty. Yet that moment had rippled outward, changing an empire and saving a child's sense of worth. She realized the truth Christopher had always taught her. Small acts of love are never small. They are everything.
Grace's mother had once doubted Andrew's ability to change. She had seen too many promises fade, too many distractions return. But as weeks turned into months, she witnessed something new. Andrew was no longer the distracted father rushing from car to meeting. He was present at school plays, art classes, doctor visits. He wasn't perfect, but he was consistent. The tension between them softened. Conversations became less about accusations and more about Grace's happiness. Co-parenting shifted from battle to cooperation. Grace, caught between two worlds before, now stood on firmer ground. For the first time since their divorce, she had two parents who, despite their history, pulled in the same direction. For her, the ex-wife recognized this change not through words, but through Grace's smile. And in that smile, she found peace, knowing Andrew had finally understood what it meant to be a father. Change is never finished. It's tested every morning, every hour, in the quiet choices no one sees. Andrew Morrison had chosen Grace once, twice, a dozen times, but the empire would whisper again. Business pressures would return,
Investors would tempt. Habits would beckon. Love isn't a single victory. It's a daily vow, renewed through action. Andrew had learned the hardest truth of all. Success in fatherhood isn't earned in headlines. It's earned in school hallways, in messy kitchens, in art classes and bedtime stories. Each day demanded the same question. Would he choose wealth or would he choose grace? The world expected him to slip. Grace waited for him to stand. The story wasn't finished. It never would be. Because real love is not a destination. It is a journey, walked every single day, one small step at a time.
Temptation never left. Emails still buzzed. Calls still came. Deadlines still loomed. Some days, Andrew felt the tug of old patterns, the urge to put business first. But now, Grace's drawings on his office wall stopped him. Her crayon skies, her stick figure hugs, her bold letters spelling Daddy and me pulled him back to what mattered. He still stumbled, he still missed moments, but he returned faster, apologized quicker, chose better. He learned that love wasn't perfection, it was persistence. Grace didn't demand flawless attention, she needed proof she wasn't second place. And Andrew gave it, not through promises, but through presence. The empire no longer defined him, fatherhood did. His struggle remained, but now it was a struggle worth fighting. Because every time he chose grace over greed, he rebuilt the bridge between them, plank by plank, step by step. Months later, the internet resurfaced the old diner video. This time, it wasn't framed as mockery. It was a comparison. Side by side, the world saw two Andrews, the distracted billionaire ignoring his daughter, and the new father laughing beside her, clapping at her school play, painting with her at art classes. The transformation spread like wildfire, not as scandal, but as inspiration. Headlines shifted, commentators praised, parents shared stories of choosing presence over profit. Andrew became a reluctant symbol, not of shame, but of change. He hadn't sought redemption for the public, he had sought it for grace. But in choosing her, he had unknowingly offered hope to countless others. The video that once humiliated him now became his testimony. Proof that failure doesn't have to be final. Proof that even the wealthiest can be humbled, and in humility, reborn.
Victories once meant contracts signed, markets conquered, skyscrapers bearing his name. Now they meant simpler things. Grace running into his arms after school, her laughter echoing in their home, her drawings of them together replacing lonely fantasies. At dinner, she introduced him proudly to her friends, her voice clear and confident. "This is my daddy." That single word, spoken with joy, outweighed every title, every accolade he had ever earned. For years, Andrew feared slowing down would cost him everything. Instead, slowing down had given him the one victory he had been chasing unknowingly all along: his daughter's trust. Empires could rise and fall, fortunes could grow and vanish, but that trust was priceless. And for Andrew Morrison, it was the greatest success of his life. He was finally the father she had always needed him to be. The story did not end with perfection. Andrew still struggled, still balanced business against fatherhood. But the difference was clear. Grace no longer doubted his love. She no longer asked if she was a burden. Their evenings were filled with art projects, messy laughter, and quiet moments that money could never buy. Linda, wiping tables at the diner, watched them arrive on Tuesdays, their smiles brighter than neon signs. She felt peace, knowing her small act of courage had changed their lives. Christopher's memory lived on in every giggle Grace released, in every hug Andrew gave. Wealth had built Andrew's empire, but love had rebuilt his soul. And in the glow of diner lights, with pancakes on the table and crayons scattered across pages, one truth remained undeniable. In the end,
Love was the only fortune worth keeping.